Okay, so our recording has started. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. So give me 1 second to do that. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to our first speaker, who is Mary Talbach.
Hello, everybody. It's going to be musical personnel here.
Mhm.
So we wanted to organize today just as a not quite start, but heading into the thick of the season, lawn care season for at least a lot of home gardeners who may not be as familiar with lawn care and their best practices. So we wanted to get you all familiar with the web resources and, excuse me, and just give you an overview and some talking points and things to keep in mind when you get asked questions about lawn care from the general public. So this is just the reminder that all of our programs are available to all persons and any protected classes. And you may be familiar with other Master Gardener events of the Injustice for All materials. So our agenda today is I'm going to start with the virtual tour of our lawn website updates, and then Stacy will be speaking about some alternatives, tips and tricks. And then there'll be some frequently asked questions addressed by Dave and Jeff, and we should have time at the end for some questions and answers, especially if you have specific questions you get asked by clients you would like clarification on. So what I'm going to do real quick is introduce you to the hub on our HGIC webpage for all things lawn care. And I'm going to break out of our slideshow for a moment and go to the live website. If it's okay. And now we've got, this is our main content area for lawn, which is titled Lawns for the Maryland Home Landscape. This page you may be familiar. Excuse me while we get this set up. Thank you. All right, now you should be able to see this. Lawns for the Maryland Home Landscape is a page we have had for some time, but it has been revamped. The old content, which consisted of, I'd say roughly 30 pages, 30 individual web pages, have been consolidated. In some cases, the detail has been expanded. So even though it looks like there's less content because the number of pages has decreased significantly, the content itself has actually expanded and been revised. More photos have been added. We're trying to make this more user-friendly, easier to find the information all in one place. So as I scroll down to this page, the topic areas, the cards here, the links are grouped by general topic areas, and there's 3 sections on this page in this hub. There's a sustainability and lawn alternative section. So it's discussing things like why growing a lawn in Maryland is difficult, why you can reasons to reconsider using a lawn in parts of the yard, how do you care for your lawn organically and sustainably. Then we move into your lawn care maintenance. So everything from starting fresh with a new lawn, rehabilitating a degraded lawn, maintaining a sort of status quo healthy lawn. In terms of seasonal aspects, soil testing, the types of grass, there's a lot of topics covered here. And a little bit you may see I will add beneath each of these page titles a short description of what that content includes to make it a little easier to navigate. And we scroll further down the page, then there's the cluster of pages that have to do with all things problems with lawns. So that can be abiotic, which as we know is anything that is not a pest or disease, but related to environmental conditions, the diseases, the insect pests, anything from animals digging. We get a lot of those questions in Ask Extension. Mushrooms that appear, slime molds, lawn weeds, all of that content is clustered together. And at the base of the page, you can link out to other content to read more, which includes blog articles dealing with lawns, our videos on our YouTube channel dealing with lawns, and Ask Extension to submit questions. What I'm going to do is feature just 2 of these pages real quick because they're probably going to be the most heavily used pages, which is starting a new lawn. This is applicable to both a fresh start and renovation, which is when someone needs to clean slate a part of the lawn for various reasons, too many weeds, say, or needs to regrade and needs to start fresh. Like a lot of our pages, you're going to see that there's some summary points at the top. This is the sort of the crux of the page. But then we're going to move into the meat of the page. And because of the consolidation, you may notice that these pages are a lot longer and more scrolling than they used to. What I have done when possible is to put in some links. I'll show this on the next page called anchor links. What that does, it jumps to another part of the page, like going to a specific chapter in a book. So that will help you get to the parts of the page faster, such as fertilization, watering, etc. So again, there's been more detail expanded on in this content. I'm just scrolling through this one page to give you a sense of what the layout is like. There's been some photos that may be somewhat self-explanatory, but it's useful for folks who have maybe never owned a home that are growing their own lawn before, or are just not familiar with how to manage lawns in our area, specifically if they moved in from out of the state. And so there's a lot of topic areas covered here, everything, how to seed. I've given people examples of the different equipment because, again, if you haven't had to manage your own lawn before, this may be familiar to a lot of people, but there's a lot of new gardeners and people who may not have cared for lawns before. So I think it helps just to see examples of what we're talking about and not assume that people know what a drop spreader is and so forth, and even, what sod looks like. So this is a very thorough example. It is talking about some of the grass types we don't get asked often about, like zoysia and Bermuda. There is limited detail on the Bermuda grass because this is generally not a recommended lawn type for Maryland. But just as just an example of all the topics that it's covering, pages will link to relevant content instead of repeating too much of it. So for example, if we talk somewhere about do these steps and then follow routine lawn care, that follow routine lawn care is going to link to your maintaining an established lawn page, because at that point you're picking up where anyone else would with an established lawn. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top of this page and I'm going to point out, and this is consistent with all of our web pages, is what we call topic tags for navigation. If you're uncomfortable using the search box in the top right of the page, because sometimes it will bring up content that is both for home gardeners and commercial interests. The topic tags, like this button that is highlighted when I've hovered over it, lawn care and maintenance, every page that has to deal with that topic is tagged with that tag. And so when you click on it, it will bring up everything that is related to that subject. So it's one way to navigate through related subjects, including links that are on that same page, which are usually at the base of the page. So I'm going to go back to our hub page real quick, which is the lawns for Maryland Home Landscape. I'm going to open our maintaining an established lawn page. This is the big kahuna. This is the main resource for any routine lawn care and caring for a lawn that doesn't seem to have any major problems, because those are on separate page contents. And I'll show you an example here of, this is what we call anchor links. So for example, if I click on fertilizing, because it's far down in the page, we tried to order these in general order of how you would be doing them. But again, you can use whatever components you need to reference for clients. So I'm going to click on the fertilizing link. So it's going to jump down to the fertilizing chapter. And there's a lot of content here. It links to the fertilizer law. So anyone who wants to get more detail about that from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, this alert box is highlighting the main concepts of the law, the main principles about the regulations, the restrictions for nutrient application. This is the same fertilizer chart we've always had. It's been clarified slightly just with language to make it a little more accessible and readable. But there are no significant changes there. It's not like we're recommending different fertilizer rates. But there's a lot of components that have expanded on in this fertilizer section that used to take up 2 or 3 HGIC pages that are now together, and then there's been more detail added, including for anyone who's asking you about how to calculate what fertilizer they need based on what they can find on the shelves. So there's a lot of good information here. We go into watering, go into liming. So there's a lot of content on this very, very long page. I'm scrolling back up to the top now. So this is how you can navigate. Another choice is to go up to the search box. So I can just type in here. And what it's going to bring up here in this case is the same thing, the topic tag. You could do zoysia. And since there's no page with zoysia as the title, just look at all the results and it's going to come up with pages that contain zoysia, which in most cases are home gardening content. We don't really have a lot of commercial content here about zoysia. So there's different ways to find the content. I'll demonstrate one more. Resources yard and garden menu. This is another way to enter all of the HGIC web content, and these are all of your topic tags. You would go to lawns, drill down one more level, alternatives, lawn care, diseases, insects, so forth, abiotic, wildlife, so like skunk damage, etc. So you can drill down and explore in multiple ways and get to the same point. A lot of these pages interconnect with each other at the very bottom. You've probably noticed if you've explored our pages before, we connect to relevant material at the bottom of the page. So this network of pages is certainly something you can explore at your own time and refer people to. Might be handy to call up if you're at a plant clinic and on your phone to jump to different places to give them the information they need. So that is a quick overview. I'm going to exit out of the sharing for one moment while I close the web browser and go back to our presentation. And I'll be available throughout the whole webinar if anyone has questions about using the website. Steph, I could use assistance for a second. And I'm going to turn this over to Stacy, who's going to address sustainability.
Okay, thank you, Mary, and congratulations on the all of the website upgrades. I know that was a ton of work, and what a great resource. Thank you. Great. It's here. Okay, so I'm going to be talking just for a short while. I'm actually, if you can pass me my timer stuff, that would really help. I've got a 10-minute timer here. Um, so for those areas that are difficult to grow lawn there, or if you're looking at increasing the biodiversity in your landscape or perhaps managing stormwater, I'm just going to start by talking about a few lawn alternatives, and then we'll get into all of the good turfgrass content. There are several sections on lawns and sustainability on the new Lawn Hub. And I'm going to be focusing on this lawn alternatives section and some of the content that you might find in there and just share some tips and tricks. So let's see if we can make this advance. Okay. So if people are thinking about converting some parts of their lawn to a native landscape, a good question to start with is where do you really use your lawn? You know, what are the primary uses of your lawn? Where are your high traffic areas? Those might be the areas you want to focus on keeping and maintaining. But you might consider lawn alternatives where it's really difficult to establish or maintain turf grass. So for example, on slopes, under tree canopies, maybe along borders to bring a little variety and texture and habitat to your landscape. Maybe you want to consider a pollinator or wildlife garden bed. If you're adjacent to or have a stream or wetland on your land, that's a great place to start to begin to create a buffer for stormwater runoff to filter stormwater, or maybe a rain garden if you have a lot of stormwater coming out of your downspouts. Rain garden can be a really great stormwater management strategy. So we have content on all of these topics, but I wanted to start with starting with some native ground cover options. The two things I want you to think about if you're considering or you're talking to clients about native ground cover is the light and the moisture. And we have great tables of lots of different native ground cover options according to the combination of light and moisture. But I wanted to point out these are all ground covers that would do well in a shady area, but they have different ranges or different amounts of water tolerance. So on the left side here, for example, is common jewelweed. Common jewelweed really likes wet places. Heartleaf foamflower likes damp places. And then on the drier end of the spectrum are wild geranium, woodland stonecrop. So taking those two things into consideration, light and moisture, will really be a key to your success with native ground covers. And let's look at some options. And there are many more, but these are a few that I love that I just thought I would share with you today. Here are ground covers that like sunny areas. Blue mist flower likes it really damp. Wild strawberry likes some moisture. The drier end of phlox makes a beautiful, brilliant ground cover. And violet wood sorrel prefers drier conditions. So again, just think about, what are what are the conditions there when someone asks you for recommendations for ground covers, try to get a little bit of information first. And then we've got great resources for them to select from. Another option is to consider incorporating some native sedges and rushes. And this photo on the right is, it's a pretty sedge. The scientific name is Carex woodii, and it performed really well in the Mount Cuba sedge trials. I chose it because it tolerates sunlight. A lot of sedges prefer shade. It can tolerate being flooded. It's drought tolerant from what we've seen and from the Mount Cuba results. But again, this is going to be about being successful with sedges and rushes, selecting species that are right for the moisture and light conditions. If you have an area that ranges between flooded and droughty, you need species that have a wide range of moisture tolerance. You'll probably be starting from plugs or container plants if you're working with native sedges and rushes. You'll want to plant in the fall or the spring would be ideal. But I'll admit that I got a late start on planting and I planted these in the summer and they thrived. They're still doing great. You might want to mulch with some wood chips in the planting year. The idea is that they will hopefully fill out. They spread rhizomatically, so they should fill in spaces over time. But the wood chips can help keep the weeds back in that first year. You may want to consider interplanting with some of those native ground covers that we talked about too. So I just had some ideas for species that might work here, like wild strawberry, sundrops, partridge berry, sedum. You will want to trim back any thatch down to the base of the plant in the winter, but do that before growing season or you'll lop off the tips of the plant. It'll still be fine, but you want to try to get that before growing season. And then it should begin to grow rapidly and flower in the early spring. So for native grasses, you may want to consider a combination of cool and warm season grasses. There's really great information on that in our new Maryland Native Plant Guide for the Piedmont region, and also on our website. So warm season grasses like little blue stem, they're going to come in later. So you might actually need to mow until that little blue stem starts to come in. Virginia wild rye is a good cool season cover crop if you want a native grass cover crop. Try to avoid cultivars on the native grasses. So you can direct sow the seed, recommended late fall or early spring. And you don't have to cold stratify necessarily the native grasses in the refrigerator like you would with some wildflower seeds. It can be direct sowed. It is important, however, to get that really good seed to soil contact. So make sure you're starting with bare soil. You might want to rake it up a little and maybe try also consider bunch grasses like prairie dropseed. I've got some photos on the next slide. So with bunch grasses, you probably might want to try plugs or container plants, mulch around those bunch grasses, at least in the planting year and as they're filling in, and water in the planting year. So you shouldn't need to water as much once they're established, and you can definitely get some water savings that way. But in the planting year, you're still going to want to water. So here's an example of prairie drop seed, really one of my favorite bunch grasses. So that's why I chose to show it so you can see how beautifully it fills out. Thanks for adding that photo, Mary. That is just gorgeous. So you can see that's just a very beautiful texture, and that's actually going to be providing wildlife habitat, as well as having a very nice texture in visual interest as well. And it's going to be more drought tolerant than your turfgrass lawn. So I like how they chose to do a section there in native grasses. Another nice one that has real pollinator value is narrow-leafed blue-eyed grass, and this could make a really nice border. This is actually just one that I caught out in the wild at Assateague National Seashore. But this is really a popular native border plant and is a really nice addition to pollinator gardens. And because it's low, that's why I suggest using it, as a border. So if you want to get try your hand at meadows and get into something a little more complex than what I've showed so far, I just wanted to share a few tips, but we've got resources, how to make a meadow. There's a whole section on meadows and all kinds of juicy resources. But you will want to think about your weed seed bed and treat those weeds. So there's probably going to be like a summer of preparation getting on top of the weeds. You do need to get to bare soil before sowing. And so that's going to require raking back any dead plant matter you have, anything that would inhibit the seed to soil contact. Do not just go buy a wildflower mix or a meadow mix off the shelf or off the internet, because it's very likely not going to be native. It could include non-native invasive plants. So you really want to go to a native seed vendor, a regional native seed vendor, and create your custom mix. And the ideal composition is going to be 50 to 70% native grasses, and then that mix of native wildflowers. It's a good idea to include a legume like a partridge pea for that nitrogen fixation. Legume seeds, they have really hard seed coats, and they have to be processed by animal digestion systems to germinate. So you have to simulate that somehow through scarification. So one simple way to do that is just rub the seeds between sandpaper. I put some sandpaper in a baking pan and just rubbed a medium grain sandpaper over the seed coat. Again, I can't stress this seed to soil contact, how important it is. And your meadow seeds do need to be lightly pressed into the soil. So in a large scale meadow restoration, you would use like an agricultural implement, like a cultipacker. But in a residential, smaller scale meadow, you could use a lawn roller that could be rented, like a water-filled lawn roller. And that would lightly press the seeds in, or you can lightly walk on it to press the seeds in. So in mixing your custom seed mix, consider planting for continual blooming to have something blooming for pollinators spring through fall. You might need to do cold stratification, and the length of time is going to vary by species, but you need to simulate the winter conditions. So you can either cold stratify in the refrigerator in damp sand for the specified number of days. Usually it's 30 to 60 days. Or you can do dormant fall dormant sowing, and that way they're out there in the field and they're getting that winter experience naturally out in the field. So that's sowing in the late fall or early winter. You will need to mow string trim about 6 inches high to knock back weeds in that first season, probably. And it's recommended to install your plugs after seeding, so you can do all of your seed maintenance of the seeds and get that all in place, and then go in and put your plugs in if you want to add some sedges, some milkweed. And I say milkweed plugs because milkweed is tricky to start direct sow in the field. And people have had more success often growing it out in trays first and then putting those plugs in. So it could take up to 3 years to establish a meadow. It's not going to be perfect and beautiful in that first year, but regular mowing once a year in the fall is probably, once you get into the maintenance phase, all that's going to be required. But it's not recommended to mow your meadow during the summer if you can avoid it, because you don't want to mow bird nests. There are going to be a lot of critters in there using this as habitat. So it's important to try to avoid that nesting season. And then I'm going to just wrap up with moss as an alternative to consider. Some people think that we need to get rid of moss, but it's really quite beautiful. It absorbs a lot of water. It has soil protection or erosion prevention benefits. Moss prefers acidic soil, and it may grow where the grass won't grow. So it can be a really great natural option. It's got habitat value. A lot of beneficial insects use it, and then birds can forage in it. And there are a lot of birds that will use moss in their nests. You can transplant moss if you want to get some moss established, but do that like from a friend's house or something, somewhere that you have permission. Don't go out collecting moss in a natural area. But it can be a really beautiful alternative in areas, your more naturalized areas, as an alternative to turfgrass. So we still love having some good, healthy lawn, and healthy lawn has its benefits. So, oh, I have rain gardens, and then I'm going to pass it on. Just a couple of brief things. Just this is like the anatomy of a rain garden. So this is not a whole tutorial on how to do a rain garden, but basically, these are the features of a rain garden. They're going to have an inflow, an overflow with a berm. Typically, you put them somewhere that they can capture the stormwater coming out of your downspouts, downslope from the house foundation. They'll have rocks at the inflow to help reduce erosion. And then it'll be a dugout basin that has like a permeable soil mix in it. That'll be made of topsoil, compost, sand that can really absorb the water. So we would typically plant a rain garden with native plants and zone them for their water tolerance. And that area of the rain garden is going to really depend on the depth of your rain garden, the soil drainage, what magnitude of rainfall event you're planning for. So usually these are designed based on a 1-inch rainfall event, but we do have larger rainfall events, and the distance from the downspout. Typically, they're about 4 to 8 inches deep. And there's a great resource on our website called Rain Gardens Across Maryland. Very user-friendly, and it'll take you through the whole process if you want to do your own rain garden. Okay, I'm just wrapping up with some pretty pictures of lawn conversion. And I used paper landscape fabric and guar coconut fiber cloth, and it did a great job of taking care of the turf grass and allowing my native plants to establish. And this is all within one season. So I started planting in the fall, and then the spring and summer, this is what I had. So I really love the paper landscape fabric option, but we've got lots of resources on turf removal. If you want to have a little native pollinator or garden of some sort. And that's the end of my pretty pictures. And we're going to move on to frequently asked questions about turf grass with Dave and Jeff.
Okay, so this is Dave and Jeff. Jeff is
Dave and Jeff.
Jeff is
Can you
Jeff
hear
is
me? I don't
behind the
know.
window. He's like Oz. He's
Oh, here I
behind.
am. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So Jeff and I are we're gonna tag team. I just thought, and some of these questions came from Stacy and Miri and so forth. So these are I'm just gonna read these off real quick, and then we're gonna go into our slides. But we
Okay.
get a lot of questions on grass seed, watering, common lawn diseases. Why can't I grow grass under trees? When do I fertilize? Bare patches in my lawn. How do I fix them? And then weeds, 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 and why we don't really, want people to just do weed and feed. So you want to add anything, Jeff?
No, I think that's a good intro for what we're going to cover.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can share, but I can go to the MTC website and show people TT77, which is our Maryland recommended variety list. I don't know if I have sharing capabilities or not.
Well, that might be the detail that they can get later, but
Okay, sure.
maybe
Yep.
maybe you can just talk about
Cool.
this because we have a link on this one right here.
Oh, there it is. There's a link. Perfect.
So why don't you
Awesome.
just talk briefly why we
Okay.
like tall fescue?
Yeah, so turf type tall fescue, and we say turf type because the older tall fescues like K31 are used more for a field grass. So if you have acres and acres, K31 is probably the tall fescue you want. But if you have a lawn, you're looking for the turf type tall fescue. And so this does well in sunny areas. It's moderately drought tolerant, can tolerate a little bit of shade. And for a cool season grass, it's pretty heat tolerant. So that's why we see that used, the most commonly used cool season grass here in Maryland in the transition zone. The fine fescues are going to be used in shadier areas. So these, when we say fine fescue, that really refers to a complex of grasses, chewing fescue, creeping red fescue, sheep fescue, and hard fescue are four of the main species within that group. And so these take more shade than tall fescue. Probably won't take full shade, so you go back to your lawn alternatives if you got really deep full shade, but these can take moderate shade in areas under trees. Kentucky bluegrass, typically we'll see this mixed in at a rate of about 5 or 10% into sod. It's a rhizomatous grass, so it helps that sod knit together, knit the tall fescue sod together. And then if you're out in the western counties, you're more likely to see Kentucky bluegrass and lawns. For the warm seasons, Georgia grass, um, again, all of Maryland except for the western part, it's a little bit too cold out there to really depend on this. But Georgia grass, very dense, deep, very drought tolerant, very heat tolerant, and that density helps to keep weeds out. So it's a little slow to establish if you establish from plugs, but once it's established, it's very dense and doesn't need much water, doesn't need much fertilizer. Bermuda grass, we see this in some lawns on the lower eastern shore. This is going to be a little bit more of a hungrier warm season grass. So typically we recommend fertilizing this 2 to 3 pounds per event per 1,000 square feet per year, and it's a little bit more aggressive and spreads by both rhizomes and stolons. And as Dave,
So,
as we've got TT77, so that gets
yeah,
updated every year. If
that's
you're
important.
It's very important. So if you're choosing grass seed, please choose grass seed that is on the Maryland recommended list, and you can find that at the Maryland Turfgrass Council webpage.
Yeah, and we have that, as Mary said. The only thing I would say is you're going to be disappointed when you go to like a big box store and their national brands. So you're really going to have to look at maybe some of the independent, retailers or small nurseries or retail centers. Look for Maryland companies. Look for those varieties. You're not going to find every single variety, but please try to get those varieties that have done. And just for your own information, Jeff does these trials down at the turf farm. So he knows all these varieties, and a lot of the national ones just don't make it in Maryland. So that's just a caveat there.
Dave,
And
I'd
I'll
also
just,
mention that if you go to a professional seed supplier, the professionals pretty much carry those Maryland recommended
right.
varieties because there's a lot of government contracts, there's a lot of high-level contracts that require the grass seed to be a Maryland approved variety. And of course, for sod, certified sod, you have to be growing Maryland approved varieties. So a lot of the professional seed purveyors will have these varieties, in addition to the smaller, more locally or regionally owned garden centers.
So really concentrate on that, even if you're just overseeding. I just wanted to touch on this technique because when you're overseeding, I think this piece of equipment really helps. This is for when you're renovating or overseeding, getting a core aerator to make the holes so that when the seed is spread, it actually hits the soil. And Stacy mentioned that too, even with lawn alternatives. You have to have good seed soil contact. So that's all I want to say about that. So this machine on the left and then the holes on the right describe that. And then again, mowing. We get lots of questions on mowing. Let's just say that you can take a regular home mower and just raise it up to the highest level for the most part. And it's going to reduce weeds. It's going to like lower the stress. It's going to be more drought tolerant. And the key things is don't mow when it's wet and don't get on it when it's dormant. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would
Jeff?
agree with that. I mean, the wet thing, a lot of people think that hurts the grass. It's just tougher to mow when it's wet,
Well, and
clumps
then it
up,
leaves clumps that,
and it
yeah,
leaves
just,
clumps. I mean, so it's just kind of it's annoying. It's not like you're damaging the grass. It's just very
wow.
annoying to clean up.
It's
Your
very
last
annoying.
your last point there, I think, is critical because we know that if dull mower blades are kind of tearing at the grass instead of producing a clean clip.
See, look at that. I got that visual right
Okay,
for
there
you.
you go. So there you go. You do have the potential for certain pathogens to more easily gain entry into that grass. as opposed to having a clean clip. Plus, it doesn't look very good. So if we're looking at trying to have a good looking lawn with kind of reduced inputs, being able to use a sharp mower blade is an easy task to do there.
So twice a year, right?
I recommend twice. If people can do it once, that's better than
Yeah,
zero.
that's right. Okay,
So
and that's an easy diagnosis. If you're a master gardener
that's an
and you
easy.
get that in your, you can just say, "Hey, man, get a new blade or sharpen it."
Yeah.
Um,
And
uh,
Emily makes a
mir-
good point. Don't mow when it's frosty. You get into
no,
that a little bit as you get
right.
into, late October, November. If you're walking on the lawn with frost, you can damage those plants.
Well, that even happened yesterday in my neighborhood.
Yeah, right.
They were on the lawns before they were.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go over this too much because again, we touch on this on our fact sheets, but it is important to Maryland. Okay, it's important for the Bay that we follow these recommendations and these rates. Okay, zero point 0.9 pounds max. Okay, and then the blackout dates are from December to March. So just remember that. There's more confusion about this than there should be. Basically, for small lawns and so forth and so on, you get a 5,000 square foot bag. Try to measure the lawn. Okay, that 5,000 square foot bag is a small bag, but believe it or not, a lot of lawns are smaller than that. So don't just put the whole bag on the lawn. Okay, just kind of get that and teach that, to and you can go to Google Earth, you can go to the real estate sites, you can get estimates of how large, your properties are so that you can kind of get an idea. Don't just, you got half a bag left, just use it up. No, don't do that, please. Okay. And that's again, just really briefly what we want to talk about on that. And then again, here are the amounts. And Mary pointed this out. We don't, this is kind of what we're living by here. And again, most of our tall fescue varieties and so forth and so on are more than happy with, these amounts and do very well. All right, disease. You want to hit this one and I hit the next one, or you want
sure.
to?
That sounds good. We see red thread in times that are in spring and fall, particularly spring. If you get a string of cloudy, damp days, it's showery. It's in the, upper 40s to 50s, maybe low 60s. And so you see this red thread develop. And so you can see the sclerotia there in the picture at the right, kind of this
Well, those
pink,
are the red things. Yeah, the
pink,
red is the sclerotia, but
kind
that
of the
means it's a, yeah.
pinkish red there on the
I call it
right.
red.
Yeah, yeah.
Maryland red.
And so it'll start out kind of as that, but it'll kind of fade to a straw colored as well. So usually this is worse in turfgrass stands that are nitrogen deficient. So if you haven't fertilized much and it's in the 40s, 50s, low 60s and damp and cloudy, you're more prone to this. So the answer to this is to fertilize moderately. Usually I recommend adding about a half a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet to try to get the grass to kind of grow out of it. And then hopefully things will dry out soon and warm up or both. And then you can kind of grow out of that. So no need for a fungicide. You can put down a little bit of fertilizer and it'll grow out of that red thread.
Fantastic. And then the next biggest one is going to come up. It's not here yet, and that is a warmer, environmental disease because it needs the high temperatures and the muggy nights and so forth. And that's called brown patch. Again, it's more severe on other turf grass varieties than it is on tall fescue. Okay, but it still hits tall fescue. Again, I don't recommend fungicides for home lawns. Uh, just keep mowing this thing. Don't be tempted to water at night and all that kind of good stuff, which actually enhances more problems. Just wait it out, and then it doesn't kill the roots, it doesn't kill the crowns. Okay, so then by fall, again, you can enjoy. It'll green right up again. Okay, so don't keep the blade sharp. Again, that's one of the reasons why we keep the blade sharp. That enhances this disease. And grubs. You want to say anything about grubs? This is the
Sure,
number one
yeah,
insect
and really
pest.
just iterating that, try to water in the morning, don't water in the evening because you're
Right.
extending that leaf wetness. So we're trying to keep those leaves as dry as possible, which is not easy to do in the summer when it's humid and it's showery, but if you're watering, water in the morning. Okay, so grubs, these are these little guys, they have
Well,
this.
again, tall fescue is a better grass to grow, right? So yeah, that's why we're starting with tall fescue.
That's why we're
More,
starting with tall fescue, right? So these little guys are C-shaped, have six legs on them, kind of this light brown head, kind of a white to cream color body. And this shows the different instars. So you've got, looks like you got first, second, and third instar being shown in this picture. So these guys will, the adults will lay eggs as we get into the end of June and through July. Those eggs will hatch into those larvae as we get into August, and they'll grow into that third larval instar before the onset of late fall. And so they were more likely to see damage on these in late August, September, because our cool season grasses have been through a stressful summer. So the root zones are compromised because of the summer weather, and a little bit of chomping on these will do some damage. You don't. I'll just mention the threshold. So for sampling, you would go through and dig up 1 foot squares, kind of peel back the sod, and if you got 6 to 10 grubs per square foot or less, you should be okay and not have to treat. If you have more than that, then you might consider a treatment. If you use Grubex, which is an active ingredient chlorantraniliprole, this is going to be more effective in the spring to kind of guard against damage in the fall. So if you've had a history of damage and you sample in the spring around this time of year, maybe first part of May, and you see a high number of grubs, you can treat with that chlorantraniliprole. However, if you look and you don't see 6 or 10 or more, then you probably don't really need to treat with anything, and just make sure that you're on top of your fertilizer. And there, as the slide says, there are several natural predators. Thief ants will eat these eggs. So we're trying to kind of chlorantraniliprole is a little bit more of a softer chemistry, a little bit more of a pinpointed chemistry if we use that in early May. So we're trying to kind of preserve the beneficial predators within that system. The other mention is that those grub eggs, when they're laid in July and early August, they need a certain amount of moisture. So if you can keep relatively dry conditions, that's helpful for desiccating those eggs.
fantastic. And here we go. We got predators. I'm sorry, I went too fast. But so again, not everything requires a pesticide. Just remember that, a lot of these things are below thresholds, but they're very excitable, to people. I mean, people get very excited when they see these things. So just remember that, and then people blame grub damage, on a lot of different things. So just diagnose it first, okay?
Diagnose it, I encourage that sampling. I think if you talk to landscape people, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you need a drug treatment," but really they're
Yeah,
more pocketed. They're
yeah,
not everywhere. So,
that's right.
do that sampling, especially in the spring, to get an idea of your population.
All right, so I'm very excited that we have one organic selective herbicide here, and we have been doing trials with this at University of Maryland here at the office. It does give a nice greening effect. This is selective, so again, all of the other organic herbicide options are basically non-selective, like vinegar and soaps and all that kind of good stuff. They're burned down materials. So you could try some of this. It's not 100%. It's not quite as good as conventionals, but if somebody really wants an organic herbicide choice, this is iron. Okay, so it does, it's fairly safe and so forth, and just follow the label rates. And we have had some success with this, so I would think it's an option.
It's an option. Also, I would look at expect to do multiple applications. So
Yes, oh, yeah,
you're
yeah.
spraying it
Yeah.
and then you're going back 10 to 14 days later to get it again. And I believe that Kelly has also found and the company has also found that if this is applied in hotter weather, it's a bit more effective. So it's probably going to be more effective at 80 degrees than it will be at 50 degrees.
Yeah, it'll be sort of, but hit the weeds young. Yeah, don't let them mature either.
Hit them
Yeah,
young.
hit
Yep.
'em young.
Hit them
All
young.
right. What are we doing now? We're gonna do Q&A, right? Can we just leave it on that screen or what are we doing? What are we doing?
Just leave our contact information up.
I believe that. Okay. So this is your chance to stump the experts. Don't ask me any questions. Just ask Stacy.
Or ask us where to find it
Yeah.
on the website.
That's right. The website.
There is one in the Q&A. I answered one.
Are
We're doing,
we doing like the lineup?
okay, I'll do the lineup. I'll bring my laptop in case I need to throw something in the chat.
You have to pivot.
Who wants to relay the questions?
Logistical challenge.
Statistical.
Freedom out.
Okay.
Okay. So our first question is, how can I best recover a grass area? It's wet and shady under a canopy that was overtaken by lesser celandine. Oh no.
Definitely the grass is struggling if it's wet shade. In my opinion, I would scorched earth it. I would strip that deal with the weed first, especially since it's an invasive perennial and it has a short control window. And then, I mean, mulch is a good stopgap if it's not the right time to plant. So whatever you want to put in its place, which I was not use turfgrass because the conditions are not right. But I would, by whatever means, manual, if necessary, chemical, if legal in the area, I would get rid of the lesser celandine and then address replanting. I would not try and plant something to outcompete it. In my experience, a perennial weed, it's not successful. But your mileage may vary.
And Mary covered this one in the Q&A, so perhaps you've already read the answer, but and just in case anyone didn't, I think it's a really good one to bring up, Mary, so I'm going to ask you this for everyone to hear. If we have weeds or non-natives, do you recommend placing a landscape fabric before starting to plant trees, ground cover, and bushes?
You're going to go over what I wrote? Or?
Yeah. Well,
I think we both have something to say on it, but
yeah,
Go
over what
my
you
opinion was when I get asked similar questions and ask extension, I don't recommend landscape fabric. There's a few reasons. I did put the caveat in because you had mentioned the paper-based alternative. So a biodegradable one, I would say that's fine. But I give it, there's a few reasons. One, because it is so long lasting. In personal experience, I've dug in a yard where landscape fabric was put down 25 years ago and it's still there. And the issues can be that as organic matter accumulates on top of it, you now have a material for weeds to germinate. From the beginning, pugnacious weeds can probably get right through that barrier anyway. But other than the issue of it potentially not working well, long-term or short-term, there might be like microplastic pollution. It's a lot of it's synthetic material. So I wouldn't want to contribute to that. And then as roots grow, desirable plant roots grow around it or above it or through it, you've got entanglement issues. I don't know if it's affecting how much oxygen they have access to once everything else starts smothering things. Water permeability, they're designed to be permeable to water, but I do wonder how much they are blocking. So just interference with root health is a concern of mine.
yeah.
And getting in the way. If you want to remove it later and those roots have woven through it, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I've had that experience and a tree that experienced root rot. I'm sure it's because it was interfering with the evapotranspiration whole like water cycle of the tree. But I think that the biodegradable landscape fabric, it's a different story. And so I would never leave plastic landscape fabric in place. But I like the paper biodegradable and had good success with that. And it does break down. You can plant right into it. You can, cut your planting hole right into it. And then I also like the coconut coir fabric. But all of that is biodegradable and shouldn't have the same problems. So
if you wanted to use the synthetic stuff, microplastic aside, if you wanted to use it to smother something, just like a mulch on the surface as like a way to block light, I think that might, if there's nothing desirable there, because that'll affect those plants too, then that might be work. But then just take it up and do something else. after it's removed.
The other thing I thought of that the plastic barrier interferes with burrowing insects. So if you've got mining bees or firefly larvae, they're then like potentially trapped, or cicadas, so anyways.
All right, Dave, I'm throwing this one to you because I know you've answered this question many times. Should I treat fairy rings? And if so, how?
So Mary reminded me, we do have in the new, lawn care section, we do have a whole section on, some of this kind of stuff. Fairy rings are a little tough. And it's different for commercial people, but for home lawns, I really don't get too excited about it. It's a thing where they're gonna fruit, they're gonna actually move around in the yard a little bit. It's a totally different story like in commercial areas, but for homeowners and stuff, I don't think you really have to worry too much about it, other than the fact that if you have pets or if you have kids or something like that, just be aware that I would just knock them over or whatever, so that they don't interfere with people. But they're actually an interesting sort of biology there. If Jeff wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, as Dave mentions, I would agree with that with homeowners. I think when you get into professional situations on a golf course or a sports field, there's certain fungicides you can use, but it's tricky because it's a soil-borne fungi or a group of fungi, many different species with that. So I would say you just remove the mushrooms. If you want to go in and aerify, that probably might help. It's not gonna solve the problem, but it might help alleviate it a little bit. Particularly when, because sometimes we see with fairy rings, you get into where they will produce these exudates that then become hydrophobic. So from that perspective, that aerification will help introduce some air so that and water movement to try to ameliorate the possibility of that area going hydrophobic. It's not
Yeah,
gonna
put a
it's not
link-
gonna it's not gonna cure the fungus, but it can help that grass from going into a hydrophobic condition based on soil conditions. So
Yeah, I put a link in the chat for folks. Fairy rings are addressed in our mushrooms and slime molds and lawns, so you can, I don't know what we had a little bit of information about them before, but that's been expanded. So we do talk about that hydrophobic issue and the 3 different categories that fairy rings can fall into, which determines how they interact with the lawn and how they look. So
They're kind of neat.
Steph, there's a question in the chat. Do you want me to-
Yes. So the next question is, when should someone consider starting from scratch versus renovating a weedy lawn?
do you want me to take this one?
You can start and we'll add to it.
So I would say that, if you've got 20, 25, 30% weeds, it's something to think about. If you've got a really kind of a patchy mess of different grasses that, maybe you have some weedy grasses like Poa trivialis in there. Maybe you have some weedy grasses like stilt grass in there. That's something to think about for renovating. And then I like the phrase, if you feel like it's an otherwise unsalvageable mess, then you think about renovating. If you've got, if you've got good density, but just a couple weeds, it seems like that, that you can kind of address some other ways. But the other thing is if you inherited something that's lumpy and bumpy, that's a good opportunity with that renovation to kind of pull in, bring in some soil and do some grading the way that you would like to grade it. So those are some situations where I would recommend lawn renovation.
I can say most of those points are on that new page too, so you can read more about that.
Replacing the turf.
Yeah, I mean, you might just think about some strategic turf alternatives in certain places, because there, if you take a moment to evaluate why is the grass not growing there, it may just be unfavorable conditions. There might be something native there that might work better, and provide more benefits.
Yeah, that's the key I would emphasize for people. Why is the grass failing there? If it's being outcompeted by weeds, it's usually that the grass was declining before the weeds took over, not that the weeds outcompeted the grass. So like the weeds took advantage of an opening, like they were thinning out. Maybe someone hasn't been overseeding for years, so the grass is thinning out. There's wear and tear from using it, walking on it, pets, whatever. Maybe there was utility work done, anything that gave them an opening. And so, yeah, soil testing, usually I don't think it's soil conditions unless something's really out of whack in terms of acidity or nutrients, but just investigating what the problem is before you just try and redo the lawn. It's like Stacy's saying, maybe the lawn isn't what you want there.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll ask people in that situation, when's the last time they fertilized? And if they give me a long pause, then I know that that was probably, maybe a contributing factor. Back on Stacy's point, obviously trees grew up over the course of 5, 10, 20 years. What may have been a sunny space or very slightly shady space 20 years ago may now be in moderate to full shade. So you're looking at a lawn alternative, like what Stacy discussed in that situation. So that's the only thing I would add to that. Think about, you're always thinking about right plant, right place for the functionality and environmental conditions of that space.
It might be better for ferns after, that time. I actually saw a beautiful example of that in Howard County yesterday. Just a very shady corner with just gorgeous, I think it was ostrich ferns, but yeah, so just maybe think a little creatively what you might do new with that space.
I'd say a take-home message for a lot of this, especially what we see in Ask Extension, for people trying to diagnose lawns in not great condition, and that usually encompasses some browning or some thinning. And sometimes it's just fair to say we can't tell what caused it to be in this current state. I mean, especially when people are sharing photos with us or descriptions, it's like I can't tell what got the lawn to this point. But I can tell you what I would do from this point on, which is follow these practices, soil test so you know how you should be fertilizing, and then address aeration for compaction, address overseeding. Overseeding is a big one because if you don't keep introducing all the good, the recommended varieties which are going to do well, then you can't keep boosting. It's almost like vaccinating the lawn against future problems. You just want to keep introducing promising grass that's going to be at its best chance to do well if the conditions are right, because of course that's core too. And then just, you might not be able to tell what got a lawn to a certain point, but you know what to do going forward, like the best practices. And the same thing, if something's just too daunting and you need to start over, either start over with the guidance in the pages or start over with different plants. And that's sort of the core, because there's a lot of times we get asked to diagnose things, and it's fair to say we can't tell what the core issue was, especially if it started years ago. But then, start where you are and go forward with the best practices. Good advice. So we get those questions all the time.
And don't despair.
All right, is that it?
That's it. So
Fantastic.
thanks everyone for joining us. We'll have the recording up on HJC's YouTube channel and also the Baywise Master Gardener YouTube channel. And here's everyone's contact information on this final slide in case you didn't get it, if you want to contact any of our experts. Thank you all for joining us.
Happy Earth Day.
So everybody,
Happy Earth Day. Thanks, Jeff.
thank you so much, Stephanie.